I returned home just after 7, still damp from the pool and sticky from the afternoon heat that clung to the skin like regret. The hallway smelled of detergent and something faintly metallic, like old keys or bloodless wounds. My gym bag slipped from my shoulder and fell onto the parquet with a muffled thud. I was hoping for silence. Solitude had become my ritual after workouts. Shower, tea, an hour of silence. But as I turned toward the kitchen, I heard voices. His voice. I froze for a second, listening to the rhythm of speech I hadn't heard in years. A deeper version of the boys. Confident, careless, textured by youth that didn't yet know its own limits. He stood by the counter, leaning casually against the fridge, a backpack at his feet. His hair was a little longer than I remembered, sun-lightened and messy, his arms bare, marked by the careless tan of someone who spends too much time outside. He grinned when he saw me. "I'm staying for a while," he said without apology, as though this was perfectly ordinary. My husband turned around, his face lit with boyish pride. "Did I forget to tell you? College is doing renovations. He's got nowhere else till mid-month." I thought it'd be fun, like the old days. Fun. The word landed in my chest like a stone. I forced a smile, but my skin had already begun to crawl with the sense of being unprepared, like someone had stepped into my bedroom uninvited. He wasn't a boy anymore. That much was immediately clear. His eyes didn't dart nervously when they met mine. They held, too long, too direct. I went to shower without another word. The water ran hot, but I didn't feel it. My body moved mechanically. Shampoo. Rinse. Towel. But my thoughts were scattered like pins. I tried not to think about the way his voice had sounded. Low. Confident. Maybe even amused. I told myself not to overreact. He'd sleep in the guest room. He'd be busy. He was just visiting. It wasn't about me. Yet when I stepped into the bedroom to change, I chose a different bra. One with thin lace and a front clasp I hadn't worn in months. I wasn't sure for whom. He had always been around. When he was little, he ran through our halls barefoot, ate ice cream with sticky fingers, called me by a nickname only kids used. But now he moved with a casual assurance that didn't belong to childhood. The years had changed his shoulders, the way he filled a t-shirt, the way he stood, wide-legged, loose-hipped, and the way he looked at me. Not disrespectfully, but not innocently either. That night, I lay awake longer than I meant to. My husband was already snoring softly beside me, the rhythm familiar and almost comforting, but I couldn't sleep. I listened. Somewhere down the hallway, I heard footsteps, soft, sure, measured. I turned onto my back and stared at the ceiling. They passed my door, hesitated, then continued. I got up and walked barefoot to the kitchen, claiming thirst as my excuse. I opened the fridge, reached for a bottle of water I didn't really want. When I closed the door, he was there, standing in the doorway, half-shadowed, his hair still damp from a late shower, wearing a t-shirt that clung too comfortably to his chest. We didn't speak. His eyes fell briefly to my bare legs. I hadn't bothered with pants, just a long tee and the soft press of silk beneath it. "You always wake up at night?" he asked, his voice lower now. "Only when the house isn't empty," I said. He smiled again, that same boyish thing wrapped in something older. Something watching me too carefully. "I'll try not to be too loud." "You're not loud." "I can be." He said it too easily, like it meant nothing. But he didn't look away. I turned, walked past him without another word, and felt his presence behind me like static. When I slipped back into bed, I pulled the sheet to my throat, though the room was warm. The next morning, I caught him watching me across the kitchen table as I buttered a piece of toast. He didn't blink when our eyes met. My husband was reading something on his phone, oblivious. I chewed slowly, swallowed, looked down at my lap. There was something unsettling in how quickly the rules were shifting, and I wasn't sure who was rewriting them. The morning began like many others, quiet, warm, deceptively simple. The kind of morning where nothing seems urgent, and yet everything hums with some unnamed tension. It wasn't a planned outing, but something about it made me hyper-aware of myself. I noticed the way I stood, the way I adjusted my sunglasses, the way I crossed my arms. He walked with confidence, hands in his pockets, talking about college renovations, professors he didn't like, music I didn't know. I listened with half my brain, the other occupied by the way he moved, by the subtle sound of his footsteps falling in sync with mine. I didn't want to be affected, but I was. And I hated how conscious that made me feel. At the checkout, he reached for the bag before I could. His hand grazed mine again. Again, not deliberately, but again, not quite innocent. Back home, I opened the pantry while he unpacked. The tension had begun to shift. No longer just internal, no longer silent. I felt it between us, like the thinnest sheet of glass. You can see through it, but you know it could crack if someone moved too suddenly. I moved through the kitchen like I always did, barefoot, hair still damp, tying my robe tighter than necessary. The house smelled of toast and citrus cleaner, and the sky beyond the windows was already heavy with sun. He was sitting at the kitchen table, legs spread loosely, leaning back in the chair with the kind of posture only the very young can afford. Relaxed, unapologetic. His shirt clung slightly to his skin, the fabric just a little too thin, the sleeves pushed up, revealing the defined line of his forearms. He was scrolling through something on his phone but looked up as I entered, his gaze lingering longer than politeness required. He smiled. I didn't. There was something unnerving in how normal everything seemed. My husband's voice echoed from the office down the hall, asking where his glasses were. I answered without turning my head, my voice steady, as if my skin hadn't just flinched from that look. I kept myself busy, fruit, bread, the hum of the refrigerator. I needed something to hold, to cut, to clean. He came to stand beside me, wordlessly took the full bag from my hands, and carried it to the counter like it meant nothing. But I noticed how his arm brushed against mine, not deliberately, but not entirely accidental either. We ended up walking to the grocery store together. He offered casually, said he needed air, wanted to stretch his legs. My husband didn't look up from his screen, just waved us off with a smile. And then out of nowhere, he said it. You know, you have really beautiful shoulders. I turned toward him, blinking, as if I hadn't heard. But I had. He was still focused on what he was doing, pouring cereal into a bowl like it was just another comment. He didn't laugh, didn't blush. He just said it like it was a fact, something he'd been thinking for a while, and decided to release into the air like steam. I didn't respond. I couldn't. I left the room. Not because I was angry, but because I wasn't sure what I would do if I stayed. In the bedroom, I stood before the wardrobe longer than I should have. My fingers hovered over the hangers, skimming lace and cotton, colors I hadn't worn in months. My hand stopped on something pale, silky, with a subtle trim, too elegant for nothing, too soft for sleep. I changed into it without overthinking, though I knew exactly why I chose it. When I returned downstairs, he was standing near the window, sipping coffee. He didn't turn when I entered. I crossed behind him, reaching for the mug beside his. Our hands touched. Neither of us moved away. He looked at me then, slowly. I could feel the shift before it happened. He stepped forward, and before I could say anything, before I could even take a breath, he kissed me. It wasn't urgent. It wasn't aggressive. It was still. His lips brushed mine with a kind of quiet certainty, like he already knew I wouldn't stop him. It was soft and careful, and the lack of hesitation made it more dangerous than anything else could have. There was no pressure, no claim, just a question. And my lack of resistance was already an answer. He stepped back first. Didn't say a word. I walked away. I didn't run. I didn't even close the door behind me. Upstairs, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor for what felt like hours. My mouth still felt warm. My fingertips trembled slightly, though I kept them pressed against my thighs to steady myself. I didn't know what to name the feeling. Shame, maybe, but also something dangerously close to awakening. Later, when my husband kissed me goodnight, I kissed him back, automatically, quietly. My thoughts were elsewhere, replaying a different moment, a different touch. I couldn't look him in the eyes. I lay in bed that night, and watched the hallway through the crack of the door. It was dark, silent, but part of me was waiting for footsteps again, but a second too slow. Then he looked at me. No words, no smile, just a nod, the barest twitch of recognition. My heart thudded once, a deep heartbeat before returning to its careful rhythm. The evening unfolded like they always do. Drinks on the porch, laughter that bounced off walls, old stories, half-forgotten jokes, exaggerated retellings of high school nights. I sat between my husband and a woman I barely remembered from a past life. And every now and then, I felt his gaze on me briefly, light as a feather on the back of my neck, never long enough to confirm, never short enough to ignore. Dinner was loud. Wine flowed easily. Her cooking was still as rich and indulgent as ever, but I barely tasted anything. The food felt like cardboard in my mouth. My focus drifted to the glass in front of me, the condensation trickling down like the sensation in my spine. After dessert, people moved outside again. Someone lit a fire in the backyard pit, and everyone gathered around with blankets and mugs. I stayed behind under the pretense of clearing dishes. He appeared 10 minutes later, barefoot, carrying an armful of wood for the fire. We stood alone in the kitchen for the first time that evening. He placed the logs beside the fireplace, then straightened. I was rinsing a plate, though the water had long since turned cold. "I didn't think you'd wear it," he said softly, nodding toward my wrist. I hadn't realized I'd put the bracelet back on. I turned off the tap. "You shouldn't have left it in my bag." "You didn't throw it away," he said. I didn't respond. The silence between us grew roots, digging deep into the floorboards, into the spaces between the walls. He stepped closer. Not too close, but enough. His voice lowered, almost playful, almost cruel. "Do you think she'd recognize it?" I met his eyes for the first time that evening. There was no arrogance in them, just heat, frustration, something dangerous and quiet coiled just beneath the surface. "She'd never believe it," I said. "No one would." "Exactly," he replied. He walked past me, letting his fingers skim the counter, not touching me, just leaving a trail of awareness behind him. Outside, the fire cast gold onto everyone's faces. He joined the circle, flopped onto a lawn chair beside one of the younger cousins, laughed at something I didn't hear. My husband patted the seat beside him, inviting me over. I sat, wrapped the blanket tighter, sipped cider that tasted of ash. He sat across from me now, legs stretched out, head tilted back toward the sky like he had no weight in his bones. But his knee touched mine beneath the blanket, just barely. A single point of contact in the darkness. No one could see it. No one noticed. And yet it was the only thing I could feel. Later, when the guests started to leave and the fire burned low, my husband leaned over and whispered that we should stay the night. I was rinsing a plate, though the water had long since turned cold. "I didn't think you'd wear it," he said softly, nodding toward my wrist. I hadn't realized I'd put the bracelet back on. I turned off the tap. "You shouldn't have left it in my bag." "You didn't throw it away," he said. I didn't respond. The silence between us grew roots, digging deep into the floorboards, into the spaces between the walls. He stepped closer. Not too close, but enough. His voice lowered, almost playful, almost cruel. "Do you think she'd recognize it?" I met his eyes for the first time that evening. There was no arrogance in them, just heat, frustration, something dangerous and quiet coiled just beneath the surface. "She'd never believe it," I said. "No one would." "Exactly," he replied. He walked past me, letting his fingers skim the counter, not touching me, just leaving a trail of awareness behind him. Outside, the fire cast gold onto everyone's faces. He joined the circle, flopped onto a lawn chair beside one of the younger cousins, laughed at something I didn't hear. My husband patted the seat beside him, inviting me over. I sat, wrapped the blanket tighter, sipped cider that tasted of ash. He sat across from me now, legs stretched out, head tilted back toward the sky like he had no weight in his bones. But his knee touched mine beneath the blanket, just barely. A single point of contact in the darkness. No one could see it. No one noticed. And yet it was the only thing I could feel. Later, When the guests started to leave and the fire burned low, my husband leaned over and whispered that we should stay the night. My body answered before my mind could interfere. I kissed him back, fully this time. Everything in me, the parts that had been quiet for years, the parts that had been softened by routine, by politeness, by duty, came awake all at once. His mouth was on mine, his breath warm against my cheek. And I didn't think about right or wrong, only the taste of him, only the way his body felt pressed against mine. Then the power flickered, a hum in the walls, the sound of a fuse catching. We pulled apart, just slightly, breathing uneven, foreheads almost touching. And then the light went out completely. We stood in darkness, my eyes adjusting to the outline of him, the shape I knew now by touch, not sight. Neither of us moved. I didn't know how long we stayed like that. Seconds. Years. The stillness held us. Then I whispered, not even knowing why. We have to go back. His voice was low. I know, but neither of us moved. When we finally did leave the studio, the sky was just starting to pale with the earliest hint of dawn. Birds hadn't even begun to stir. We walked back across the grass in silence. No need to speak. There were no apologies. No awkward jokes to fill the space. Only the quiet acceptance of something that had passed between us and could never be taken back. I slipped back into the guest room without waking my husband, slid beneath the sheets as though nothing had changed. But my skin still carried the memory of his touch. My lips still tingled. My robes smelled faintly of smoke and him. He would be gone in the morning, back to campus, back to whatever version of normal he pretended to maintain. And I would stay here. I would fold laundry, answer emails, kiss my husband on the cheek when he brought me coffee. But I knew something now, something I couldn't unknow. I would wait for the next time, and I knew he would too.